Hi, it's Mrs. Duncan, and I wanted to go over character analysis with you in this particularly this PDF to see what was really relevant and kind of distinguish between simple description or summary versus real analysis. So every story has characters, and we have looked at conflict analysis, and we've identified the roles in the conflict that the characters or the main characters would have. Your main character is going to typically be the protagonist, and then you'll have another key or main character who's the antagonist. But that's not all there is to character analysis. That is specific to the conflict. And there will also be other characters. Some may take the side of the protagonist, some may take the side of the antagonist, or be not involved in the conflict directly at all. But when we analyze characters, no matter how important they are to the conflict, they can all be analyzed. They're not all equally developed in detail, and that's part of our analysis as well. So if we had a main character, we were analyzing that character, we would think about these first things. This is how we would start thinking about them. Can we tell from the description by the author how the character looks, dresses, and moves? What clues do we have there? What are the clues we have as with regard to their personality? Are they introverted? Are they extroverted? Are they analytical? Are they very social? Things like that. What does the character say and do that expresses their motives, why they do what they do? What are their actions, and how do those actions impact others? Or how do they react to others? Every character, if it's very representational of human beings, have strengths and weaknesses, faults and virtues. What are those? What are their ethical, moral basis? How do they respond to issues of right and wrong? If they make a mistake or they do something they know is unethical or immoral, do they justify it? Do they acknowledge that it's wrong? Those kinds of things. And does the character change? That's a really key. And if they do, why? What's the big motivation? So those are clues. That's not in itself the end. That's only the beginning as we study that. Now, what does an author do to reveal that? They don't come out and say, here's the character's personality, here's what their motives are. They don't say it directly. They give you certain things that give you some background, okay? They're going to give you history and background. They're going to insert that in there. So that's often in that exposition, but it'll come up in conversations, or if you need to know another way, the author will tell it in the narration. Expressed means there will be statements of comparison between the characters. Oh, you're this or you're that, but they're not like this other. By now, we can talk about everyday use this way because the mama, as the narrator, expresses distinctive similarities and differences between Maggie and Dee, and that helps us really understand very clearly the characterization of those two sisters. And she gives some background with the house fire and the burns and Dee's reaction to it, and how all that is how we get these clues, and we need to look for that in the other stories as well. Things shared by the author, by the characters, the role that the author assigns the character, like whether they're the protagonist or the antagonist, or a bystander, or kind of a passive, how he or she represents the emotional world of the character, if there's any symbolism attached to it. Here are the terms, though. Once we kind of think about that, that's how we look at it. These terms that are primarily in these little italics are the words that we finally come to, and we have to use when we say we've analyzed. We can't just stop short of doing a description of their looks or their personality. That's the clues to this. When we assign character analysis, after we have kind of go through, we have to figure out, first of all, obviously, if we don't have a lot of answers to these questions, if it's not much there, it's a minor character. If it's a major character, maybe we need to read it again, and think a little more deeply. So obviously we're going to have a protagonist and an antagonist. So is the character one of those? The next question is a really important one. Is the character round? Another word we use for that is complex, multidimensional. And if there is a lot that you can answer in here, in these first two sections, then the answer is yes, they're round. If you find very little, you're really grasping on straws. There's very little said or done by that character. they just are there for whatever reason, then they are a flat or two-dimensional character. So that's going to determine which direction we go. So if it's a round character, they're either going to be dynamic or static. Dynamic means that they are growing and changing within that storyline, not something in the past or maybe in the future, but in the course of that story conflict. That conflict is going to change them somehow. They're going to be different because of it, or they're not. Maybe they persevere, they're resolute. In spite of all the obstacles, they remain unchanged. So it's not a positive or negative thing. It's just recognizing, very importantly, did that character change and why? And that was part of the question earlier. And if you answered yes, they changed significantly, then they're analyzed as a dynamic character. And then your explanation of that would go back to those earlier questions and explain how they changed and what was the motivation for that change and in what way did they change and why that was important to the story. And if they did not change, the opposite of that, why not? What kept them stuck or able to stay unchanged? All right, and usually a minor, but not always a minor character, is a foil character, and they are a contrast to this is a primary character. So often that's, whatever the protagonist is like, you have a foil character would be, not the antagonist, it's just somebody who has usually opposite attributes. Let me take Maggie and Dee, for instance. Sometimes students incorrectly identify Maggie as the antagonist or the protagonist, but she's neither. She is not directly involved in the conflict. She watches it take place. She's a very quiet, passive, she avoids conflict. When the issue of the quilt comes up, even though you could tell she really wanted them, she said, no, Dee can have them. She never opposed Mama in her decisions ever, and she never opposed Dee. But she is definitely the opposite of Dee. So she makes a great example of a foil character. Dee is this outgoing and kind of arrogant and know-it-all daughter, very intelligent, and Maggie's soft-spoken and introverted and unsure of herself and insecure, and she's just a total opposite. So she is a great example of a foil character. Now she's round too because we know a lot about her and why she's like that, but she's a foil character. Sometimes those characters are symbolic, and that's often a tip to the theme, and they represent something. It could be like a vice or a virtue, which is something good or something bad, or it's just society. Think about that with Warren Path and the people that Phoenix encounters, or the characters in Rocky Horse Winter. Think about how they represent certain types of people, and that's different from a stereotype. A stereotype is a typical type, role, and that is more for a minor character. But usually your main, or even sometimes your minor characters, like Dee's boyfriend, is a symbolic type of character, a representation of a certain aspect of society at that particular time in the 1970s. And so you want to think about that. What do they represent? And that the author desires to highlight, not just as a unique person. There's a layer, and that's the thing about literature, is it has layers. You have what you see on the surface as if they were, real people in fiction, but they represent something. And so that's what our analysis reveals, and it also helps us get more into what's the meaning, because that meaning, that theme is tied into these characters. They play a very important role in that. It says if you have trouble beginning a character analysis, here's some strategies. I don't have this, this is just the source of it, and there's a link there. But, we don't have a lot of time for that, and since we're at the college level, I'd expect that our development of that will happen through the discussion boards and the quizzes, and then as you write, your draft. But there's definitely some resources there, some links if you want to dig into that a little bit deeper, and that's why they're there. Okay, so that is key. You will see this, just like you'll see the conflict analysis terms and have to use them, you'll use them in your essays, you'll use them on the midterm exam, you'll use them in the final exam, you'll see them on the fiction tests. These are things you're gonna, these terms, and specifically these right here in the italics, protagonist, antagonist, round or flat, dynamic or static, foil, symbol. Those are the key ones that we're talking about here that you have to know, and they'll be in the quiz.